last episode, Your Bookshelf is Your Grimoire, I shared the origin story of how I got started in this whole business of reading romance novels as shadow work, as medicine, not just for us as individuals, but also for the collective. And I shared the story of how my master's thesis on romantic comedies became a spell, and it became the ritual in which I worked and I lived it, and what came of that. And I also touched on a little bit about my cave year of navigating grief and burnout, and how during that year, I read 131 romance novels, a bit like Alice in Wonderland, just going through the tunnel and ending up in a different world. And in doing that, it reawakened that original spell of my thesis. And I also found as I was reading, probably by book 50, that I was kind of reading the books with a certain framework. And that it had 3 levels, which is what I talked about in the last episode. Level 1, where you read for the pleasure, for the plot, for the enjoyment. Level 2, when you're exploring your personal psychology, what's healing for you in that story, in the book you're reading. And then I touched on a little bit about the collective dream, which I like to call it the 3rd level of reading. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, it's there for you. And it includes the whole process of working with these 3 questions, level 1, 2, and 3, to bring it to your own practice of reading, something that you can try tonight to anything that you're reading. But today, I want to go a little deeper, not so much into the 3 levels, but what I've been discovering and for myself, and I want to bring this to you, about what romance novels are actually doing underneath the genre, underneath the tropes, underneath the pleasure and the pretty covers and everything that goes with that. There's something more. Because the more I read these books, the more I pay attention, not just to the stories, but to the patterns across the stories. I notice which tropes keep surging, what dynamics keep showing up, and what kinds of heroes and heroines that millions of people keep reaching for. And here's a few things that I wanted to share with you from what I've been observing. Now, these are not just for entertainment preferences, and I like to think of them I want you to invite you to think of them more than that. It's much more than just a trope, much more than just the entertainment. And I like to think of these as doors. I call it the forbidden doors, specific doors that our culture has taught women in general to keep closed or to open very carefully. And these are aspects of ourselves that we are trained to hide, to suppress, to apologize, to forget, to not even touch. They're forbidden in many respects. For some countries and cultures and ways of living, these are completely forbidden. And I feel that romance novels, because they work under the radar of, if you will, literature, it's not as respected. So without any planning, when you're reading romance novels beneath the surface of just the entertainment, these doors keep opening up, keep reopening, or they crack something open. And like I was saying, I like to call these the 5 forbidden doors. And so today I want to explore these 5 doors. I don't want to push you through them. I want you just to invite you to take a peek and see what's on the other side. Just enough for you to recognize which door perhaps has your name on it. Now, before we go into the doors, I want to set something up here. I want to talk about the monster. And not only because the monster is not for everybody, not many people actually read monster romance novels, but it's a growing subgenre, and it's the one that really took me in. I wasn't expecting it, but I found myself reading more monster romance than anything else. And I think it has to do perhaps with Beauty and the Beast being my favorite fairy tale. and always liking and working with mythology and fairy tales as well, I think there's something already for me personally that already calls to the monster. But this can also come into the paranormal romance, the dark romance, which is it's a big and growing subgenre of romance. In all of these, the key element, I would say, simplistically, is that the main masculine character, the main hero in general, isn't a polished, beautiful hero. He's not a polished prince. He is something much wilder, something much closer to instinct. It is something that doesn't fit the rule of polite culture and society. And it's usually what we're taught to run from. And yet, it keeps attracting many of us to read these stories. There's an allure to the monster. There's a quality to these monstrous heroes in which the heroine, the main female character in general, kind of stops every time. And what I find also interesting, the first thing when I really was reading, I was really I discovered myself like deep into monster romance. I started asking myself, what is it about monster romance? And I think one thing that stood out to me was that it didn't have the same particular male gaze we see in our culture. The male gaze that consumes, appraises, dissects. It was something else entirely. Not that perhaps it wasn't peppered with that, but it was something more wild. And what I saw in the monsters that I read, it was something about their gaze that says, I see all of you. I see your rage, I see your hunger, your beauty, and your shadow. And I am not flinching. I'm not telling you to get smaller to fit into a certain box. I am not consuming you. I'm not dissecting you. I'm not asking you to edit yourself. Everything that you are is what I'm here for. In general, that's what I was picking up from the monster romance, and that piqued my curiosity. So I think there's something to be said about that monster gaze, which is different than the male gaze. It sees the heroine whole, right? And I think there's an element there that it's hitting a certain nerve. And also what impressed me is that unlike when I read Beauty and the Beast as a child, the beast doesn't transform into a polished prince. It stays beast. And I think that's an interesting element. Why is that? Why is that hitting a certain nerve? Another element that I saw with the monster gaze is you're not just being desired, you're being witnessed. So here's a gaze that is unflinching, reverent, primal. And it is the key that opens the 5 doors. Because each of these doors guards something that our culture has told women to hide. And the monster is the first thing that helps crack these doors open. So let's go to the doors. 5 doors, 5 parts of the self that have been locked away. So let's walk up to the first one. So door number 1, the body as it is. The first door is the body. It is not the body as a project, the one that you need to improve, tone, shrink, smooth, optimize. It is the body as it is, right now, without any negotiation. So as we know, our culture has taught women that our bodies are to be an endless work in progress. It's never really acceptable as is, or never really quite there. It's never enough, right? And we have internalized this endless renovation projects, right? It really kicks in, a full start around puberty, and it never stops. We keep going. The funny thing is that I see in romance novels, especially with the monster ones, that when you walk up to the door, the monster's like, whoa, 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 stop right there. It's not about you tweaking yourself. It's about you as you are. And the other part that I've noticed as I read these books is that the desire arrives without conditions. The monster hero here doesn't desire the heroine despite her body. He desires because of it, but as it is. not the curated version, not the filtered version, not the plastic surgery version, the real one. And then, as in preparation for my program that I'm launching now, The Forbidden Doors, I asked through a questionnaire various women a series of questions, and some of the answers have been quite illuminating. And in relationship to this door, one of the women said that every time, well, in general, let me go back. In general, I asked them, how does the body react when they're reading the books, when they're approaching the books? So we start at that sort of surface level at first. And a lot of them said the same thing. The cover, the colors, the vibe of the design, the beauty of the cover, the energy it gives off. So that was the attraction. The body responds to the cover. And another one even noticed that her own collection of books has kind of a pattern of its own. There's often nature scenes on the covers, and she sort of chooses them before she knows consciously why she's choosing them. She's reaching for these books with the body, not with the mind. And so this is an interesting point. The body is choosing. And then if you want to go a little deeper than just how you choose the book, think about what happens inside the story. So as I was saying, the monster doesn't apologize for his body. He's not concerned about the heroine's body. He's taking as it is. No tweaks needed. But what's interesting about the monster is that he moves through the world fully inhabiting his form. He has no shame, no editing, no shrinking. In general, of course, it depends on some plot, but in general, that's what I see. So when he meets the heroine, he's not asking her to shrink either. He wants all of her. And so I think there's an element with door number 1 that brings in the body. That as you're reading these books for hours and hours, book after book, I believe that our own bodies start to remember what it feels like to take up space without apology. And I have found that romance as a genre is very embodying. It puts you in the body. It makes you feel through the body. So the story sort of models that ease, but also how we relate to the story in the book itself or the Kindle or the cover. It is also teaching us to come back to the body. And the body learns through the story what the mind has been arguing for so many years, but the body is preeminent here. So if this door calls to you, and if you keep reaching for these stories where the heroine is desired fiercely without apology, exactly as she is, then your psyche might be telling you something about what you're really needing, or perhaps you're ready to recognize and negotiate now. So door number 2. I love door number 2. I think it's a very key one. And door number 2 is rage. Rage unleashed. As we know, women's anger is not taken as seriously. It's not respected. We're supposed to be diminishing our anger, right? It's the most policed of our emotions in our culture. We are allowed to be sad. That's very fine, acceptable. We can be even attractive, fair enough. We are allowed to be anxious, pretty relatable, but rage, fury, that kind of anger that wants to burn something down, oh, that's dangerous. That is hysterical. It is too much. And yet, if you look at what's surging in the romance genre right now, especially with dark romance, the heroines are the ones who fight back. They don't just endure, they rage. And it's become even a trope, right? And the heroes, their counterparts, don't calm them down. They don't utter the disrespectful sentence, calm down. They're very clear who is in the room when she's in fury mode, and they don't leave. They may be protective. They may even be possessive. They maybe even have the whole trope touch her and die energy. But that is not ownership. It is a sort of a sanctuary that allows her fire to rage, but it doesn't put it out. So in my survey with other readers, I liked this one where one of the readers said she almost broke her Kindle over a book that she hated. She loathed the hero so much that she stopped drinking her signature cocktail in real life. And another reader DNF'd, meaning she didn't finish the book, the moment the story turns towards abuse. She was like, nope, Adam and hell no for her. The whole body took the emotion, and it changed aspects in their own lives. So even though they knew a happy ending was coming, they were like, nope, this is not happening. And they just knew it. So here's the union of door 1 and 2, rage and the body. Now, if you think of just the surface element, the level 1 of reading, this can be your book review. Didn't like it, give it 1 star. Close the book, you're done. No need to look closer. But what's interesting is that the rage is the boundary. It is the body saying, no. Your mind might not have gotten here yet, but I am shutting this down. It is the hell no. And I think there's something that is interesting here with the rage, not just through the reactions we have with the stories of how we might say, no, I'm not reading this book anymore. Or we hate a certain trope, or we avoid certain stories. But what I find interesting in these stories and how popular they're getting is where the heroine is allowed and given the sanctuary, given the space, the container to roar, to rage, and she's not being managed. She's not being asked to be reasonable. And I think us as readers in that moment, living perhaps vicariously through the character, we can exhale. Perhaps we have never been in a room where our anger was treated as sacred, not as inconvenient. And I feel these stories are creating this space for us. It allows our nervous system to practice to a certain degree, exhaling, allowing our rage to roar. So that's a healing function on a personal scale. But I also wonder if it's a healing function, and I think it is for the collective as well. For me, personally, what I found interesting was, as I was reading these books, the books that caused me more rage, having to tap into the anger, were the ones that had a very difficult relationship with mother, because the way I navigated grief had a lot more anger than sadness, because my relationship with my mother was so complex. So I think that's an interesting point, how healing it was as well. Of course, I think there's an element to our cultural moment of now that there's a lot of things for us to be enraged about. And where do we transmute? Where do we metabolize this anger? Now, let's move towards door number 3. And very different from rage, the third door is about pleasure. Pleasure is the feast. I want to be clear about something. Not all romance books have to have the spice, the so-called spice, the little peppers next to it. There are many ways to navigate that. When I mean pleasure here, I don't mean just the sexual pleasure, the intimacy pleasure of these books. But I think the idea of pleasure in general is the more sort of radical aspect of this. And that's why I've mentioned several times about romance books being the guilty pleasure. People call it the guilty pleasure. It's the thing that I do over there. It's where I escape. It's the pleasure, but I don't want to give it the full respect that it deserves, perhaps. I think about romance, one of the things about pleasure with romance, it is sort of manifold. There is the pleasure of reading the story. This is the guilty pleasure. We like to read these books. We like to see the covers, be in that world, but it's treated as like a guilty pleasure. It's not as serious as the other stuff. But it's also the idea of pleasure within the story. And this is where the intimacy, the sexuality, however many levels of spice it contains, romance tends to center female pleasure in the plot. The heroine's desire, her pleasure drives the story. And her satisfaction is sort of a guaranteed happy ending, pun intended. And her body's responses, the heat, the ache, the wanting, are all treated as important. They're worthy of attention. They're deserving of an entire narrative arc devoted to that fulfillment. So depending on how well the story, let's say, is written, the moment of intimacy, there's a sense of a full unfolding of that desire. There's a culmination of that desire. It isn't just, if you will, smut. And that's the other thing that we dismiss the books. We call them smut. And are they really smut? And why would they be called smut or pornographic? Why is female pleasure, when it's centered, to be dismissed? So back to my little questionnaire. One of the readers said something that I was really sort of thinking about. So one of the readers answered in my questionnaire, which I found very interesting, is that she said romance novels awaken her desires in a way that she didn't know she had. That she had felt shame about her sexuality her whole life. And that in reading those books, going to those worlds that most people would call filth, was the very thing that finally helped her feel accepted and seen. It wasn't therapy. It was not the self-help books. It was romance novels and the community of women reading them. She said that she had never felt more comfortable in her own body and her own desires, including with her partner. Another reader also said something even more powerful as well, that she learned how to be more intimate on many different levels, from the intimacy of deep conversations and how impactful a hug or even hand-holding can be. This is just a small example of how these readers, these women, are not describing just escapism. They're describing how their actual lives change because they have practiced through fiction. So when the hero is devoted to the female character's pleasure, he's curious about her body without shame. He's not just a fantasy. He's modeling something. He's showing the reader what it looks like when desire is met with reverence instead of judgment. I think as we read, of course, as we grow as readers, our pleasure also shifts. We stop, hopefully, apologizing for what we want. We stop putting joy on the sort of layaway for another day, another time, after we do all the work. And I think this is an important element of respect to ourselves and the genre itself. If you're drawn to these stories where pleasure is unapologetic, then notice that. Notice where your hunger is for that story and where it's pointing you to put joy in your own life, back into your own life, instead of putting it in the layaway. So now we're getting close to door number 4. And door number 4, I like to call it the animal nose. The 4th door is instinct. And in our culture, we are trained to lead with our heads, to think, to analyze, to make pros and cons lists, to be rational. And we have lost trust with our older knowing, the one that lives in the body. So I think door number 4 and door number 1 are very much related. But here's the one, door number 4 says yes before the mind can even explain why. Doesn't even want to, at least at first, recognize it. And the instinct recognizes something, a person, a place, a danger, a home, before there are words to describe it. And I think romance novels are full of this one. The moment the heroine feels it, the pull, the heat, the bone-deep recognition of the hero, before she even knows his name, before she understands why, before her mind is even able to put up all the resistance and arguments against it. It's that instinctual bond. It is the body staking its claim. And I find that quite fascinating that us as readers respond to this very physically too. We just know. We feel it. We shiver. We catch our breath. It is our body saying a full yes to a scene or to even a story. Try this out even when you go to a bookstore. See how your body reacts to the books that are around you. And one of the readers in my questionnaires, she said that she doesn't really notice her preferences changing in terms of stories or tropes when things are happening in her life. She just knows that by the time she's really deep into it, she's like, oh, here it is. I've been reading this type of book for quite a while now. She went through the stories, picking the tropes and certain types of stories instinctually. She was living them. And then only with a little bit of time gone by could she look back and say, oh, I was drawn to something different because I was becoming something different. So her instinct was leading her the whole time, and her conscious mind was just catching up later. The other reader, described her reading evolution in this way. I thought this was very interesting. She said that at first it was all very vanilla, very closed door. And then over time, the door opened wider and wider. And then she commented in a humorous way, now the door is wide open and monsters are coming in. And so she connected directly to her confidence growing as a reader and as well as a woman, her ability to hold the other, the spice of life in a much bigger way. But she followed that first instinct. She trusted her own instinct as it grew, and it allowed her to open other doors. The other part of the instinct that I find very interesting is how one of the tropes that is quite popular in romance is the fated mates, right? It's perhaps its most direct expression of this instinct. It is the recognition that bypasses reason entirely, right? So this is where not just how we choose the book, so because of the cover of the story, but we just know. It's almost as if the story falls onto our lap. There's almost like a fated mate trope playing between us, the reader, and the books we're choosing. It just is. It falls on our lap at the right time. So one thing I did notice in my so-called cave year is that I was choosing a lot of books that I would sort of briefly read the synopsis and be like, okay, looks good, let's read it. And then inevitably these books were touching on grief and also complicated mother-daughter relationships. And none of these elements were being mentioned in the synopsis. And so it's almost as if my instinct knew the book I should read, and the mind couldn't even catch up. And by the time the mind caught up, I was halfway through the book and too invested to stop. I was in it. And so there's something that I feel speaks to the instinct that we have going towards certain stories. And sometimes, maybe to get a little mystical here, maybe the book chooses us as well. There's an instinct in picking up the reader. So I think it's an important element to notice in your own reading and stories, what just grabs you without any rational thinking or excuses, and see how it shows up in your life, what brings up for you. I would love to hear about that. And now we come to door number 5, the last one. And this one I like to call it the claimed in full. The 5th and final door, it is about sovereignty. And this is the door that holds all the other doors. So there's a myth, I touched on it briefly on the last episode. There's an Arthurian myth about Lady Ragnell. And Lady Ragnell was cursed into a hideous form. She often would show up as the hideous hag, so ugly that people couldn't even look at her. And when she came upon King Arthur, well, longer story, I'm going to sort of summarize it here. King Arthur is actually approached by her brother, and who poses the question, what do women want? And King Arthur has a year to find out the answer. So he sends all his best knights around the realm, interviewing women of all classes and backgrounds, what do women want? And they would all come back And there were too many answers. It was very difficult to pinpoint what was the one thing that women wanted. Just the day before the challenger was supposed to meet King Arthur and say, hey, do you have the answer? Lady Ragnell shows up and she says, I do have the answer. But for that, in exchange, I want to marry one of your knights. And all the knights look at each other and they're like, hell no, we're not doing this. Except that Sir Gawain, the best one, the best looking one, the one that all the ladies loved, he says, sure, I will marry you. And everybody's shocked, but he says yes. The wedding goes through. And so here we have the Beauty and the Beast in reverse. And so on their wedding night, when they are in their room together, alone, all of a sudden he looks at her and she's transformed. She looks beautiful. And he's kind of in shock of that. What happened to the hag? So she turns to him and she poses a question. She says, do you prefer me to be beautiful by day, or when all others can see how beautiful I am, but hideous at night? Or do you prefer me to be beautiful at night, and so that it's just for you, and a hag by day? She poses him that question, and he doesn't choose. He turns to her and says, you choose. And those two words, that's when the curse breaks. That is the answer to the riddle at the heart of the story. What do women most desire? What do women want? It was not what Freud was saying. It is sovereignty, the right to choose for yourself, to be seen in your own terms, to be claimed not in fragments, in the acceptable parts, the palatable parts, the polite parts, but in full. And like I was saying before, the fated mates is probably one of the tropes that has this sort of dialed in, but it plays out in the others as well. Because in these stories of romance, the heroine is chosen in full. She's accepted as herself. She has the ability to choose, right? She doesn't have to shrink. And I think that's really important here to think about how many of these stories, of course, it's not all of them. I'm having to generalize a little, but there's the element of what does the heroine want? It is sovereignty, the ability to be herself, to choose for herself. One of the readers in my questionnaire, the one who answered, she talked about how fated mates and destined pairs are her bread and butter. And she also said that these stories helped her through to navigate postpartum and also to receive an unexpected health diagnosis. But what kept her gravitating towards this element in this sort of trope, the fated mates, is that it showed her that love is the greatest magic and unifier. And it's what she needed. It was what she was reaching for. Not when life is easy, but it's when life is the hardest. So this, again, is not escapism. This is her psyche reaching for the medicine to be claimed in full. Being told by the story that she was reading that she belongs, that she's chosen, and that the bond will hold even when everything else is challenging. It might even be falling apart. The other reader answered in a way that I thought was very interesting. She said, don't be afraid to jump into something different. It may open you up. It may open a door that surprises you. It challenges you and helps you heal. And I like that she used the word door without even knowing this whole framework I have about the forbidden doors. And she also said that feeling confident about a happy ending matters. Beauty matters. Seeing a zoomed out view of one's inner archetypes matters. These things are not trivial or trite. They ensure the health of the soul. That was a pretty deep answer. The health of the soul. And I think this is what romance is also giving us. I am not dismissing, if you will, the problematics of romance as a genre. Because as in with anything in life, there's the light in the dark. There's something to be balanced. But I do want to focus more on the medicine that lives in romance, to go beneath, to go under the surface of the criticism and the positions. But it's about what is it doing to us? Because I feel like so many people are reading it. Something is happening. Something is really working through the collective, through these stories. Also to say to you as a reader, perhaps you're new to romance, maybe you're an avid reader, but to trust what calls to you and to stop dismissing the parts of yourself that the culture has told to hide. And not that these doors are easy to walk through. Maybe our realities don't fit these stories, but I believe that the stories we are reading are helping us navigate them in some way. Rehearse them in our own inner mind. That way it can help us shift our own mindset and thus perhaps also change our realities. And we do have the sovereignty in how we interact and relate to these stories. So you don't have to wait for the permission. You can just say to yourself, you choose. You have the power to choose how you're going to engage with these stories. So in short, these are the 5 doors. There's more ways we can explore them in more depth, to have a deeper conversation. But I think I just wanted to share with you these 5 doors so that you can take it and look at your own bookcases and say, which door am I walking through today? So just to repeat them, the 5 doors: the body, rage, pleasure, instinct, sovereignty. And I invite you to think about this. Just sit with it for now. How do you feel when you hear about these 5 doors? Which one sounds more interesting to you, that sort of perks up your curiosity? What stirs in you? Or which door do you recognize that it's calling to you right now? So maybe when you heard the word rage, your whole chest opened up. Or maybe it surprised you. Or maybe it was instinct. It doesn't matter. I invite you to just notice how you felt. That's information. And that is your reading life telling you something that is beyond just the tropes that you crave, or the heroes that you love, or the scenes that you return to every time. Those are all mapping something for you. And so I invite you to bring that curiosity to the things that are catching your attention. It is not just to consume what you're reading, it's to metabolize what you're reading. So next time you pick up a book, or next time you're scrolling through your to-be-read list, see what grabs you and ask yourself, which door is this? Is this book about my body, my rage, my pleasure, my instinct, my sovereignty, or all of the above? Don't analyze it, just notice. It all starts with the noticing. Noticing is the practice. And then over time, the pattern reveals itself. Now, if you've listened to these 2 episodes, you've kind of practiced a little bit on your own the 3 levels of reading. That was from the last episode. And now I've shared with you the 5 doors. And you're like, yes, this is interesting. I want more of this. Then I invite you to join my Forbidden Doors. This is where your reading life becomes your map, your compass. So we meet for 6 weeks. It's a small circle of women. And we don't just explore these 5 doors, we walk through them. Each week, 1 door. You can bring your books, your patterns, your tropes, your cravings. We're going to work with guided imagination journeys. We're going to have the real conversation. We're going to explore the framework to make it more visible for you to help you see in your own list what you're reading, how these are already waiting for you. Now, Forbidden Doors is not a book club. We're not here to discuss the plot and the themes, per se, of that story. It is more of a space where we're going to go underneath the genre, underneath the tropes, especially the ones you keep gravitating towards. So your participation is key. You bring in the tropes that you're gravitating towards, the ones that spark your curiosity, your hunger and even your embarrassment. Oh, especially the embarrassment, because that's usually where the medicine is the strongest. You don't need to be reading a specific book. You can bring your whole reading life, the things that you've devoured long ago, or the things you devoured lately, or the things that keep calling you from your bookshelf. Maybe it's the stuff that's in your to-be-read pile that's whispering your name. My place here is to bring the framework, to bring in my training in depth psychology, my experience in working with mythology and fairy tales. And together, and even astrology. And together we're going to discover that really the greatest romance is not on the page. It's the one between who you've been and what you're becoming. So we start on May 16th. We meet up for 6 Saturdays. We skip Memorial Day weekend, and we wrap it up on June 27th. We meet via Zoom. It's a small group. Everything is recorded so you can watch later. However, the real juice is when we meet in person live, because that's where the real heat is. We get to hear each other's stories, share what's going on, and sometimes by seeing another reader standing at a certain door, we are like, oh my God, that's the same door I'm standing on. So that's where the real alchemy happens. So to me, Forbidden Doors right now, I'm looking for the founding cohort. It's small, it's intimate, and your insights, your experience literally shapes how this work is going to develop. So if you're curious about this, I invite you to come to my website. It's all there, vanessacuto.com. And Couto is Couto. Or if you want to talk more about it, send me a comment through the website. Let me know how is this landing for you, or just share your insights around practicing the 3 levels of reading from the last episode, or in hearing about the 5 doors. What I hope is this: even if Forbidden Doors is not for you right now, I hope that the idea of the 5 doors stays with you. I want you to notice how each one felt for you, which tropes spoke to you, so that every time that you open a romance novel, you know you're not just reading a story. You're standing at a door where nobody gets to decide whether you open it or not, but you are the sovereign one who's going to open that door. That's the whole point. So thank you for listening. Until next time.